Welcome to Haaseline Entertainment, Revelation of the Spirit. This is our second new version of our show. If you remember last time, we had a show that dealt with retailtainment, and we talked about the advantages of the brick and mortar retailtainment versus e-tailtainment, a retail media. And obviously, in the days of omni-channel marketing, we have to meld these different marketing opportunities that we have in order to have the best reach and the best results and the best execution against any type promotion that we do at retail or online. So, what we want to discuss today is what is the best genre? What is the best genre to play in the entertainment IP world? And I can tell you from experience with Nabisco, and this goes back to even before we had what we're doing now, streaming. Um, we had VHS was the first kind of product of a film that we could have in stores. Now, some of you are obviously my age and understand the VHS business and the players. Everybody trying to fix that clock to make sure that when it was blinking at the right time. But originally when we introduced films, they weren't even made for retail; they were made for rental. If you really wanted to buy a film, you had to pay over $100 or more for a film. But once the Disney Corporation got into selling their films at retail in VHS format, Nabisco, who I worked for, was a big player in that, offering the consumer a $5 off by buying X amount of products and mail-in rebate. And we did that with great films like Beauty and the Beast, 101 Dalmatians. And we were the first to market with that program. And just like any other program that's successful, once you're in it, everybody jumps in, and then the other studios jumped in, and pretty soon we had VHS phenomena at retail. And of course, obviously, we've progressed all the way to the streaming mode. But still, when you're as a brand or as a retailer, you're looking for what is the best play for me financially, as well as reach in a film or a genre in the entertainment business. And some of this is going to be basic, and most of you are going to know this, but we're just going to review it. Obviously, again, animation is a big player. And since then, we've also moved to live action. Now, I can tell you from my experiences that probably one of the best films I ever tied into because it also included an extremely aggressive product that went along with it was the live action of The Grinch. We all know the Boris Karloff um, one that we've been watching since kids was then made by Universal, Ron Howard, Brian Grazer, and was starring Jim Carrey, and it was huge. And we also had the first time I was able to convince Nabisco to do a different embossment on the instead of the Oreo embossment, where we put the Grinch on the Oreo with green icing. And it was extremely great success. And the process to back then to get retailers to jump on it, back then I knew we had to get the largest retailer involved, which was Walmart. And we did some interesting things by meeting some of the buyers as well as the marketing people out at Universal Studios who did a wonderful job of allowing us to present the Grinch to Walmart and present what we were going to do from a product and a marketing and a retailtainment event for Grinch. And then we were able to go on the stage and actually see where it was being filmed with Ron Howard. And actually, Clint Howard was there also. And, to see this kind of winter wonderland that was being filmed. It was very impressive. And the entire process of selling that in and working with Universal was a great opportunity for us to nail the door shut and make sure that we owned the fourth quarter that year. But so what is the best genre? I believe animation is in most cases because it's first of all, number one, it's fairly safe. And it obviously is geared towards family and kids. So, it'll always be a great opportunity to hit the ball down the middle of the fairway. But studios know that animation is also a cash cow for them, and so they charge a lot for you to play in those arenas, and so the question becomes, how do I maneuver if I'm a small brand? How do I maneuver as a small retailer and take advantage of entertainment marketing? And there are ways to do that. We're going to discuss that a little bit. But first, let's talk about the most profitable films by decades, starting in the 1970s. So the number one film in the 1970s was the slasher horror film from John Carpenter, Halloween, done in 1978. On a budget of $325,000, it grossed over $70 million dollars. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, the daughter of Janet Leigh, and this very low budget film became a cultural phenomenon. And so we moved to the 1980s, and the top film there, and obviously the 1970s gave us the what we would call the birth of the blockbuster. And back then, that films that were making somewhere between, excuse me, 50 and $100 million were considered blockbusters. We got the term tentpole back in the 70s that we used with brands and retailers. In the 1980s was the rise of the franchises. So now the studios realized that in order to have a blockbuster, they needed to build franchises that we can have multiple films, multiple stories based on the same characters. The top film in the 80s was E.T., the extraterrestrial. And we all know that Steven Spielberg, Drew Barrymore was obviously her entry into the marketplace. A budget of 10.5 million, and it grossed 792 million. So again, this is a family-friendly film, and we took the animation, and we took the family friendly live action, and we started to build franchises in the 1980s. By the time we got to the 1990s, um, the top film in the 1990s was when the blockbusters and the potential to grow a franchise really boomed in the 90s. So the number one film was the Blair Witch Project. So imagine that, 1970s, it was Halloween, a horror film, a slasher film. And now we get to the 1990s and we get to the Blair Witch Project, which was one of those films that appeared to be, it was marketed tremendously. It appeared to be this hidden footage, and it was more like, one of these reality shows that was starting to come into grip for television. But here it is in movie form, The Blair Witch. The budget was $60,000, and it grossed over $248 million dollars. So this found footage kind of Howard horror thing started to explode in the industry, and it was marketed extremely well. So by the time we got to the 2000s, this what we would call again franchises had already started to come through Warner Brothers, through Paramount, through Universal, through Sony. Obviously, big franchises like Jurassic Park and Ghostbusters, the Mission Impossible films, even franchises on animation with Ice Age coming from Fox. And there were even a lot of smaller ideas, and this is something that we're trying to get to here in this conversation, like The Land Before Time. It was a great film. It had a couple awesome releases, and then it went straight to video and probably did, very well. And there were great opportunities at home video in order for smaller players to get involved. So by the time we got to 2000, if you can imagine, the top film back then was My Big Fat Greek Wedding down in 2002, made again on a budget of $5 million, and it grossed $368 million. So now, another new kind of genre has come out, a rom-com, and in this case, an indie film, which started to progress now with technology kind of catching up to where the everyday person didn't have to be a movie studio to put together a film. Those always the difficult piece was finding the distribution piece, but they're obviously able to figure out. We have films today like Terrifier in the horror genre that are getting great distribution now just because they are very, very profitable franchises. When we got into 2010, we started to get into the superhero movies, and of course streaming, and that just made everything uh, more palatable for the superhero genre. You know, we had superheroes before that, but it really started the boom, almost an overindulgence in 2010. The number one film was Joker, with a $55 million budget, and it uh, yielded $1.07 billion to Warner Brothers. And that obviously with the DC franchise. It's interesting how the Marvel and DC comic books, um, have progressed from the old days of Adam West and Batman on TV, all the way moving through Christopher Reeve on Superman. And now, of course, on Marvel's side, they're delving into numerous characters, and everything seems to come into now a multiverse. And we also have the Avengers on the Marvel side, and of course, Justice League on the DC side. But by 2010s, the superhero genre was really taking over so much to the point that it almost was an overindulgence. And a lot of filmmakers were getting tired of these superhero films coming out. In fact, I would say in today's world, there's so many of them that they've had to back down because the latest ones from Marvel have not been doing well at the box office at all. And certainly, DC has had an issue. And as we know that this year, 2025, we have a new Superman movie coming out, and we'll see how that does. So, so the most profitable films by franchise. Okay, we talked about going through the entire, through 2010. But who are the most profitable films within um, these big universes? So again, we just talked about Joker, DC. It was the number one profitable film. In Marvel, the number one profitable film was Iron Man in 2008, with a budget of 140 million, and it grossed $585 million. And that kind of really launched things, Iron Man for Marvel, moving in the right direction. In the Star Wars, and we know that's a big franchise. The Star Wars: The New Hope, the film that started it off in 1977, was made on a budget of $11 million and has grossed $775 million. So obviously, a huge multi-billion dollar franchise has grown from that film in that era of building franchises. And then, of course, Harry Potter from Warner Brothers has been a huge um, franchise that has grown now, and I guess will be coming to a streaming format on Max, HBO Max. I think it's just called Max now. And so Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was the most successful film out of that franchise. On a budget of 125 million, it grossed 975 million dollars. So kind of the first film that turned a book series into a global empire. Um, Obviously, we've had others come from that, like the Hunger Games. Um, Again, we talked about Jurassic Park from Universal. The original film in 1993 on a budget of 63 million, scored $3 billion in return. And of course, we're continually getting now new Jurassic Park movies. And a lot of these, since they've become IPs and theme parks, so obviously let's take Universal, who has Jurassic Park and has Harry Potter. They need these films and these series on these different formats in order to keep the franchise moving. We all know that Disney now has bought, Marvel and has bought Star Wars, and they also have had to, release different shows on Disney Plus to keep the theme park piece going, as we know that they have Star Wars in their Hollywood studios and as well as on the West Coast. So let's talk about what the final takeaways of this franchise, blockbuster, different genres. Horror and indie films have the highest ROI. And why is that? Well, most of all, it's because they have low budgets. They have a low budget going in. In a lot of cases, if you think about some of those low budget horror films, they're creating stars. If you look at a lot of the great movie stars we have, they all most of them started in the horror genre. Look at Kevin Bacon being in the first Friday the 13th film, Johnny Depp in The Nightmare on Elm Street. So a lot of these stars have started out in that genre, and they started out when they weren't making a whole lot of money. It was like their first gig. So on small budgets, the horror fan is a huge, huge, loyal fan. Now, obviously horror is something that you got to look at your brand and say, can I play in that? But just like the superheroes, just like a lot of these franchises that maybe are a little on the fringe of fantasy, playing a little more with an adult versus a young kids, most of these have kidtized a lot of their content. So you have Spider-Man babies, if you know, on Disney, on cartoons. There's even uh, kidtized horror versions of characters. So that makes things a little bit easier. If, like, for instance, Universal Monsters, um, which is, obviously a huge franchise, Ghostbusters, which has some scary elements that some brands would stay away from. There are ways, because of animation and because of kidtizing some of these IPs, that they're interesting to play with. And then not only that, when do you play with them? And obviously we have different holidays that have, and I try to get away from what we normally do, but we know January is going to be a lot with Super Bowl coming in. We know there's a lot of wellness going on. We know February is going to be filled with Black History Month, Valentine's Day. As we move into March and April, we got Easter, we have March Madness. There's a lot of things that are already set just based on dates in other marketing opportunities. But Halloween obviously is a great place for a tie-in with a horror film. Superheroes and science fiction are the big, massive earners, okay? But lower ROI because it costs so much to do those films. You need big stars. There's a lot of, CGI has not become a non-expensive way to go. It becomes, even though you're using less physical attributes in production for design. It's obviously a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of technology goes in. So costs a lot to make those films, but they do, if they work, yield an awful lot of dollars. And then, you got franchises like Star Wars and Harry Potter's that started. When they first started, the investment was small. And then they've turned that into $1 billion franchise, which is interesting. And if you look at most of them, when they finally hit their peak or they just can't afford the dollars, the actors who have made those franchises blockbusters become too much to pay. They start to go back to prequels and things like that. So when comparing all of these genres, I think you have to look at, first of all, what is your brand's message? Who is your consumer? Who are you going after? And then look at the different holidays and say, how do I play and fit? But we've been talking about what I would consider tentpole or the bigger movies. Even those low budget horror films that we've talked about are the high end, right, of their genre. They may be low budget, but they're for them it is a high budget. If a horror film has a budget of anywhere between 30 or 40 or $50 million, that's considered a very extremely high budget for horror. So there are some opportunities to play in, and we're going to get into those in our next conversation, which I'm going to try to do either this week quickly or next the front end of next week. And that is, how do I take some of the anniversaries of these films? Because if you couldn't play on it the first time it came out because of the budget and the monies that were required by a studio to play, it makes sense that you can ride your horse on an anniversary or a re-release. And I'll give you an example of what we did on that. I had a tough time. I mean, I did a lot of movie marketing with Nabisco and Kraft, but to get them to move on that took numerous conversations, and it took a lot of success, particularly at Walmart, in order to move that needle. But it was tough. It was nowadays they all play. It's like welcome to something you should have been doing 50 years ago, but you didn't do it. And now everybody's trying to do it and stick their foot in the door. But anniversaries, for instance, E.T., Nabisco, I couldn't get them involved with E.T. Everybody knew with Spielberg it was going to be a huge, huge hit. Um, but we did get involved when they re-released it. And it's an interesting story because they re-released the film, and then all of a sudden the powers to be at Nabisco said, "Oh, this is a great idea. We got Spielberg, we got the re-release in theaters. This is the first time they brought a blockbuster back with a lot of money to say, and they added some maybe additional footage, and this was going to be the next big thing." And so we did Chips Ahoy with the glowing chips from the finger and for E.T. It was the biggest bomb that ever happened. First of all, um, it wasn't a film that people really wanted to see back in the theaters, that they weren't ready for that. They had already seen it. We already had a saturated home video market where they could actually see it on, in the comfort of their own homes at this point on several different formats. And it was a huge, huge issue. The bigger issue I had, just a story on the side, was that obviously I was uh, very keen to Walmart's business and what we would do there. And Universal was having a tough time getting Walmart to buy into this program. Obviously, getting us on board, Nabisco, Big Brands, Chips Ahoy, was a big coup for them. But they ended up doing an exclusive toy deal with Toys R Us. Now we all know where Toys R Us is these days. And I can tell you where that promotion went when they did that exclusive deal. And quite frankly, once it happened, there was no way that I could do anything with Walmart, not with nothing to sell on the back end. So although we had the ET product in Walmart on behalf of Nabisco, I basically ran away from it as a promotion because it just didn't make sense. Anything we would have done to promote this film was going to send people to their competition to buy goods. And how Nabisco allowed that to happen. Most of you that know me know I screamed and yelled about that, but to no avail. Nabisco went ahead with it, and of course we were selling almost $0 at Toys R Us. It did allow us to get some of our product in there and maybe get a set, but look, they were a toy company, not a cookie seller, so it was a fiasco. But the next piece that we talk about is going to be, how do we get involved with some of the anniversaries? And we'll be discussing some of those that are coming up here. And I'm always interested in what films are playing and what's available from the studios in order to play with that. Now, we know that there's not going to be any kind of extended product re-release, but there's a lot of fun ways to play with anniversaries of big franchise movies. But you got to put your thinking cap on. You got to be a great marketer to do that. But the cost to do that is so much less than to tie in with a tent pole. And that's quite frankly what we try to do with some of our smaller clients that want to play in the IP world is to get them involved with some of these anniversaries. And again, if you work it and you know how to work it on social media, you know how to work it with your products, you know how to work it with some exclusive giveaways on those franchises that make sense to your brand, there are ways to really capitalize on a on an anniversary of a huge film in the industry. So with that, I'm going to let everybody run. It's been a great week. I'm glad we got to have a quick run today on the different genres to play in. Give you some food for thought there. And when we come back next week, we'll talk about the how the franchises move from franchise to franchise, from genre to genre, and more importantly, how do we go back and capture the magic in the bottle from the anniversaries of some of these great franchises we talked about. Have a great week, and from Haaseline Entertainment, see ya.